Welcome, everyone. I'd just like to welcome you to, I think it's the third in the Blooming Work to Blooming Work podcast series. So today I've got Lyn Man with me, and this is a bit unusual in that we're flipping the interview today. And Lyn, who I've been working a lot in the past year with co-founding the Earth Content Community, has kindly agreed to interview me to talk about my story, escaping from BA contracting. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Lyn.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for inviting me to be here to interview you today. So my first question for you are, what are the challenges of being a contract business analyst?
Okay, thank you, Lyn. So I suppose the first one that jumps to mind is predictability or lack of predictability. So it's the sort of clues in the name that you're a contractor, so therefore you're going from gig to gig. So you can try and control things, but you're never going to know what one gig is going to be like from one to the next, which is good in some ways, actually, because if you're not liking the one you're on the moment, you've always got another one to go to in the future. So they're always sort of time limited. But it also means that you don't know what you're going to get. And I guess if you look at business analysts or business analysis itself as well, it's still quite a broad church. And ever since I've been doing it, I think it's still the case that it's somewhat open to interpretation, and people have different expectations of what that might mean. So there's not one, people have used different titles like lead business analyst to give it more expectations around what's required of the role, and then they might add in a software package title in the front of it. So there's ways of sort of refining it, but it can mean different things to different people. So whoever you're going to work with, they'll come with a set of expectations. You'll come with a set of expectations, and there's bound to be some mismatch or aligning of those, and you never can tell really what's going to happen. So it feels like there should be more than one, actually, in terms of issues, but that's the one that comes to mind immediately. I mean, and I think making it personal, because this is obviously what it's all about. It's so personally for me, how has that manifested itself? Too limiting. So I guess it's too limiting for me over time. So when I first started, that was sort of a bonus that people didn't know quite what was required. It gives you a lot of freedom to explore different things. Doesn't lock you down too much into a very particular role with very specific responsibilities. But for me, I wanted to do other things. I'm the perennial child who's always asking why. I always want to understand things more. And for me, that comes to problems when you discover the questions you're asking are perhaps challenging the business themselves and why you're there in the first place, which in some organizations is exactly what you should be doing. You should be challenging, the business case or what it is that you're doing. But it can be problematic, and it's not always well received. So there's a bit of tension there sometimes around, well, what's the truth here? What's the questions you want to ask, and is actually going to help you in your contract? So I think that's sort of my desire to explore has been sort of curtailed somewhat, and try out new things, do new things. I'm always looking for something different to do, exploring new territory. I like the ambiguity, I like the uncertainty for me, and actually, ironically, in some places it can be quite specific and restricted as to what's expected of you, and it's a lot easier if you just fit into that mold. But then those are the contracts I would tend to avoid because of that restriction. So yeah, I guess those are the main points. And the other thing that comes to mind is the sorts of clients I've worked for have been mostly banks, not exclusively, but large corporates and banks mostly. And there comes a point when you're questioning your contribution, and you look at, well, what's the actual impact of the work I'm doing individually, especially in the last few years. Looking at the climate crisis has made a lot of people question things much more deeply and me no less than anyone else, although I've been doing that for some longer time. And it doesn't excite me. Keeping the cogs turning on a bank is, someone's got to do it. It's probably an important job, but it doesn't include lots of novelty and opportunity to explore typically. So to some extent it gets boring, and to another you just get irritated, and that starts to be bad in terms of your work, and it encourages all sorts of issues, I think, in terms of how you that might leak into your work. But probably more importantly than that, why are you doing this job if you're not enjoying it? Bottom line.
So it's interesting you started with the lack of predictability, in that, because you're going from gig to gig, things are kind of out of control. Yes, there's the variety, but at the same time, you don't know where you're going to be next, and different expectations come in. So some roles, it sounds, are very curtailed and very fixed, which seem to be a lot of what you were describing with the banking. It doesn't give you much room for maneuver. And then going to you personally, where you've said, the roles could be too limiting. So even though some were maybe more open, actually it was almost sounded like, with the unpredictability of them, actually created tension, because you're trying to establish what people actually want and what your expectations are with somebody else's, and then how much you can question the processes, the systems. And at the end of the day, so while there was a lack of predictability for you personally, what was missing was the challenge, the uncertainty, the adventure, and the ability to actually contribute to the world, the society as a whole, rather than just being a cog in a big wheel.
No, there's definitely things that resonate, and I think I was thinking it can get just very messy, because you can question things, you can choose not to question things, you can wonder whether you can and how you go about it, and get wrapped up in the sort of the expertise of being a business analyst and how you, as they call it, manage stakeholders. And that can get a little edgy, and it certainly has done in my career. And then so there's risk attached to it. But then you've got this, so there's risk attached to this. In the meantime, you're not necessarily enjoying the job, and you're not really sure why you're doing it. Why do you take risk? You take risk because you're committed to something. So essentially there's something that's got to give there, or had to give for me, because I wanted to become a better BA, or become better at whatever I'm doing, better at my work. And I was seeing, that risk manifests itself in terms of the way you're treated, and maybe you're in a more senior role, but politics starts to manifest itself. Conversations are had which you're not necessarily involved in, and it's, which maybe affect you, and you just have a lot of uncertainty and discomfort for, as I say, coming back to for something that isn't really exciting, isn't really something you don't want to get out of. I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning for anyway, because of the social impact. Was like, it's the mundane stuff that banks do.
So what's interesting is what you're highlighting is how it's impacted you in a number of different ways personally, in that actually you really lost the motivation to do it. And at the same time, while there was a level of risk, the question for you was that risk worth taking? And did you really want to do that? So those were some kind of impacts that you've highlighted. And you've also, again, mentioned contribution. But just thinking back, what did you actually really want to do while you worked as a BA?
Yeah, no, thank you, Lynn. And that's a really good question to reflect on, not least because there was clearly I was attracted to it. It was a deliberate choice. I was working in the software industry. I was a developer, and that wasn't really working for me. I think it was a mixture of not being as good as I perhaps wanted to be, and just not, just sort of losing motivation for it. So I had this sort of period at the end of the 1990s when I was thinking, well, what else is it I'm going to do? Then what is it that I really want to do if I don't want to be a developer, sort of backroom boy, as I thought of it at the time. And it was something very much about working people first and foremost, and business in particular. So rather than facing technical problems, I was more interested in facing sort of business problems. I think these days it's more human problems, but at the time it might have been a flavour of human, that I think is probably more about tackling the business problems rather than the technical problems, was what I was, I guess, were the more interesting ones, because they were the ones that often underlay the technical problems. Unless the business isn't clear on what it wants, then how can you, introduce a technical solution? So I guess coming back to that theme of asking why, I'd sort of found a level below, which I needed to fix, if you like, to go and do that job better, which eventually became my job as a business analyst. And at the same time, one thing I have done a couple of times in my career has been involved in startups, which has always been a positive experience, which gives you a hint at, what I enjoy. I enjoy that uncertainty and exploring and adventuring, if not financially successful. And when I was the end of the 20th century, I was finishing up being involved in a startup which wasn't going to go anywhere, and was going to go into, I decided to go into contracting, because the corporate possibilities that were available to me, whether that was a consultancy or a corporate of some sort, just, I don't think I actually really thought about it explicitly, but in hindsight, it's because there was nothing in that for me. It wasn't because I didn't want it. It's what would be the point in that? That seems to be hierarchical. That seems to be involve career ladders. That seems to be involving managing people, which I don't necessarily know I'm interested in. All sorts of reasons I shouldn't do that. So it was like, well, I guess it must be this contracting thing then. That seems to allow me to avoid all that stuff. So it was a desire to solve business problems was really the main driver for that at the time, having realised that the technical problems weren't the ones that were exciting for me anymore to be addressing.
What's interesting there, you highlighted, and as a developer, you felt you actually weren't being as good as you wanted to be, and because of it was solving technical problems, but you'd realised there was a level beneath that had to be solved first. But even within the one we were talking earlier about the business analyst, again, it was that striving to do better. There was an element that came through was of striving to be a better business analyst, striving to do a job. And I just find it interesting that this theme is coming through, that actually in solving the problems, you've always been pushing yourself to be doing something better, to be contributing more, not just to what you want, but also to the organization you're working for, or what you can offer in the future.
Yeah, and I've always had an attitude of, I like work. Work matters to me. I know other people who, I think it matters to a lot of people, to be fair, but there are some people you encounter who it's a means to an end. It's just the money, and then my life is over there. It's after 5 o'clock, whatever. And I've never been that person. So if you're here, and part of it's just pragmatic, it's like, why would those 8 hours, 5 days a week, whatever it is now, why would you do that doing something that doesn't really interest you or whatever? It just seems ridiculous. So part of it's just enjoying work and getting satisfaction out of it. And then I guess, yeah, it's striving to do better. And I guess what's interesting for me partly is I've questioned whether I'm ambitious, but I've realized that it comes in different shapes. And ambition when I graduated would be, are you going to join this software consultancy, the Accenture or whoever it was, the big name at the time, which never really appealed to me. It just sounded like a lot of work, and the whole ethos just didn't appeal. It didn't appeal to me. But that all seemed to be like, well, that's what achievement looks like. You go and join one of these organizations, but it's only, but you realize in reflection and hindsight, achievement can be different things. It's not about the company you work for, the position you hold, or whatever. And for me, it's achievement by being a better worker, if you like, learning, becoming, improving, which isn't something I've tried to do. It just happens.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that, because actually one of the things you've just highlighted there is the different stories that we tell ourselves over time, or that we've been brought up with. So what you're saying was, when you came out of university, ambition was deemed as this, and almost the expectations, even in going to your job, the fact that you felt you always had to be doing more and becoming better. It's interesting that the stories behind that and the expectations of the business, it's kind of all the personal stories kind of seem to weave through this. But one of the things you just mentioned was what was important to you was about getting satisfaction. Now, I'm making a big assumption here, but because you're no longer a BA, I assume that's you decided at a certain stage that satisfaction you were not getting, that you weren't able to achieve that. So what was it that actually made you attempt to get out of the BA work in the first place?
Yeah, and the first trigger was the second startup experience I had at the end of the early 2000s, and that came to an end, as these things do, and I was frustrated, and I had some free time on my hand because of the working arrangement I had, and having followed other people before, I thought, well, no, I need to start something myself rather than being a follower, a co-founder, or contributor, whatever. So I enjoyed that experience. There were definitely lots of ups and downs in that particular one. But I said, well, this gives me energy, this gives me a buzz. So why don't I just do it myself, build a business? So I don't, and and I guess there was a recognition that was in part, I wasn't enjoying what I was doing in BA contracting. Didn't want to be doing that for the rest of my life. So I needed, therefore, to be building something else, therefore build a business. And that was the catalyst, if you like, initially, was to create that startup buzz, but in a secure financial way, which I think is a key challenge, and build my escape route, build a business that would replace my income, essentially, was what I had in mind. So that was quite a long time ago. It was 12 years ago. And quite a lot have happened since then in terms of starting businesses, mostly around, when people say, do what you know. So my desire was to help the BA community, because I knew business analysis, therefore I could help serve business analysts within it, which I did both, professionally and sort of commercially, if you like, by starting my own business ideas. But that was, I don't know, I want to sort of cut several years short and just say that was several years of trying different things, from mentoring individually as a service, to setting up coaching or training packages, selling training essentially, through to offering consultancy around setting up BA practices within organizations, which is popular, I guess, probably from the start of 2010, but has became an obvious thing for big corporates to do. So consultancy around that seemed an obvious commercial opportunity. And so lots of different things I tried alone and in partnership with others. And I just ran out of steam, really. Just thinking, well, none of these things are happening. I used to do most of it on the side. So on occasion, I would have maybe a 3-month run when I was outside of a contract. So I'd put a lot more effort into it during that period. Often I do it on the side. But either way, things wouldn't come anything like, to fruition in terms of just because what I guess my dream was like, well, I'll just replace this income over here with this new income over here, and then things will carry on as they were before. I'm contributing to the family in the same way, and nothing changes. So yeah, I mean, I mentioned before there was a few catalysts, and one of the other key ones was when I was feeling despondent and had a new idea, and just okay, start marketing it. Where do I start? Just couldn't be bothered. And a friend of mine said, who's a coach, said, would you do this if you weren't getting paid for it? And I said, I didn't say anything, but it was immediately, well, obviously no. And it was, the connection was made then immediately. Well, there's something missing here then, because you don't want to do it because you don't want to get paid for it at all. Clearly, that this doesn't matter to you. No, there's something else missing. It's not just about, here's a commercial opportunity, here's something you can do. Now go and do it and create a business from it. It's what's going to actually, well, the opposite of being despondent, I suppose. What's going to inspire you? What's going to excite you? So that was an aha moment then of like, well, that's what I need to be looking for. And I think other moments along the way were, one of the key ones was when I was contracting and somewhat interested in what I was doing at Lloyds Bank, because they were doing a big ways of working transformation, which was much more going deeper into the why of how do we actually operate as an organization, questioning on the face of it deeper assumptions, opening up lots more to be explored in theory and somewhat in practice. So I was feeling actually excited and inspired about what I was doing, and found myself using those words, not having used them within living memory. So that was a catalyst as well, because at the time I was thinking, well, if I'm taking off this BA hat, I need maybe to put another hat on. I need to present myself to the world in a different way that they at least recognize. So, or have a purpose. So that was something I got, just caught my attention, set me alight, the idea of, well, why shouldn't everyone expect this? Why is this just something that happens accidentally if you happen to be in the right job at the right time? It's almost a case of why isn't this a human right? Which sometimes sounds ridiculous in the cold light of day, but I'm pretty sure it's a reasonable expectation, or at least something to aspire to. So that was a catalyst in terms of like, well, what am I going to do in the world? What am I going to aim for? What am I going to have a business around? Which I guess leads to blooming work. Really was very much about that idea. And I think the other one I would mention is when I was doing some self-exploration and looking at working with a friend, which we were both sort of helping each other out, exploring. And it was all about looking at your childhood to find out who you are as an individual, and not putting job roles or whatever in the way. What is it? But who are you without being a father, without being a son, without being a worker, without being a whatever? But who are you without all those things which you are as well, but without identifying with those? And this is what came out of a conversation which I've written about quite a bit. Was my mum talking about me being adventurous as a child, and a few short while after that, it just hit me. That's a really good way of, if I want to give myself a job role or a job title, adventurer, that's probably going to last. That's probably going to work well for me potentially for the rest of my working life. That feels comfortable as a fit. So that was, I guess those were different catalysts. And there is a fourth one that comes to mind, which is COVID and my contract coming to an end. So it was, there were, some people do talk about the advantages of COVID sometimes, and the advantage here was that my contract came to an end rather unexpectedly. I hadn't been keeping an eye on it. I'd started to lose faith in the contract at Lloyd's anyway, and suddenly I was, well, what am I going to do now? Well, I've been saying for some time, I do not want to do this job. Now is the time to follow through on that. And also, my motivation to do it was so low that I thought, I'm just not going to get past any interview, which was a sort of story I was telling myself and my wife and I think my family I was living with. So there was truth to it, but it was also very convenient. So that was the, cut your ties, albeit they've been cut for you. And that's taken some time to actually detach completely and speak to my agent and say, stop contacting me with BA contractor roles, because I genuinely don't do it anymore. Whereas for quite a long period, I would maybe want to think about that or be open to these ideas, because it's quite scary.
Yeah. And actually it's quite scary goes back to what you'd said earlier on about, you wanted to create the startup buzz, but in a secure financial way. And I know this is something that you help people address, is actually having those difficult conversations with spouses, but actually looking at what financial resources do people actually need. And I think that is a difficult thing, because when you were talking about this, you were doing these additional, your mentoring, training packages, consulting. It was all on the side because you didn't want to take that. It was the money, looking after your family was what took priority. But then going back to actually even, what I really loved was the advice you got, actually, would you do this if you didn't get paid for it? So actually getting that focus of actually, rather than doing things purely because you know how to do it or you can do it, actually, what are you getting back from that? So then going on to, actually, is it inspiring you? Is it moving you towards your purpose? And again, things you help other BAs to think about in their line of work. So I think, it's interesting with your catalysts, they've all pulled in different aspects of things, which are things that you are helping other people with now. And then keeping that adventurous spirit by actually going back to the startups and doing things on your own. So while it's scary, going back to actually the uncertainty, the ambiguity, those are the things that you thrive on. So again, what is it that you're getting that from your work that's nourishing you and supporting you? It isn't all about the finances. And from what you're saying, you're managing to really build this balance now, in this recognition that sometimes you have to get something else more than just money from your role. So I appreciate you highlighting those facts, because it often is very much the security and the fear of stepping outside of that without something else lined up that stops us taking the next step.
It is, yeah. And I think what I wanted to do is connect the dots a little bit there in terms of having something that you're excited about, like an external goal to go for. So if that's, in my case, that's about creating a work or help assisting people to find work they love, that they're excited and inspired by. And that's a goal that excites me personally. So it gives you the courage to take greater risks. It's not just about the money, but equally, I guess the flip of that is, well, not the flip of that, but also then doing it in a way that you love. So that's where the adventurer comes in for me. Recognizing everyone's different, not everyone's an adventurer, we're all, but it's about what is it that excites you. But I was, and I'm wondering, whether I was naive or ungrounded when I was trying to start things up. And, a bit of fingers crossed that I can probably make this work without committing full time to it, without necessarily investing. I did invest money in some cases, that I can probably make this work and it'll be okay. And yet it never was. And definitely part of that was not wanting to have a big conversation about, I don't know, I'm starting a new business. I'm not happy with what I'm doing at the moment. It's going to take a couple of years, I reckon. I'm not quite sure what it is. a lot of unknowns, and started that conversation with my wife, which isn't necessarily the right way to do things either, I would say. However, I would say that that's, looking back, that was definitely a flavour of avoiding that conversation and just fingers crossed. But having said that, it's really valuable, because if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't, be where I am now, and I wouldn't be aware of how you can take those lower risk decisions, but they never really quite give you escape velocity, if you like, to get away from something if you want to leave it completely. So for me, it was about leaving it completely. That's not necessarily the way for everyone, but for me, it was. So that is scary, because this income goes to zero, and you need to create something comparable, or you need to create agreements and do things differently.
So what else have you learned that you would do differently based on what you know now?
Well, I think the first thing is to allow things to evolve, and not need to get to the answer immediately. So there is something to be said for, I'm sure this is a famous quote from someone somewhere, someone must have said it, about, you needed, whatever road you take is the road you need to take. It may take longer than you would have liked, in the same way as I could reflect back on my experience. But you take the lessons from that, and they're useful, and you can use all of that in the future. So it's about really being kind to yourself, which is something I used to say quite a lot to people, and I probably should remember more, is not to judge yourself harshly for failing. It's just understand that's the path you needed to follow. And as long as you're growing and learning and evolving and adapting, that's all you can expect of yourself. So I look at what I do in that light. I certainly haven't always done it in that light, and I've wanted something else, but I wanted it to be here now. I wanted that certainty. I wanted this visionary work life, whatever. I wanted to be free from that, so I could go and find something I did love. But I think that's one of the biggest things for me, is just allowing yourself to learn, and being kind in how you reflect on how you operate, and how things evolve. There was something else coming to mind, but I think that'll probably do for the moment. You might come back to me.
Yeah, and that whole thing about the journey might take longer than you like. And I think for me, I always like the analogy of a mountain. So if you look at the route, you would think that the fastest route up the mountain would be straight up. But actually, that's often the most difficult route, and you have to put in an awful lot more effort. So yes, it might be faster if you're incredibly skilled and quick, but actually the better route to take up the mountain is the path, because you can't always see what's in front. You can't see what's being thrown at you. And I think that reminder of being kind to yourself, but also, and I think this is really important, that actually not judging yourself if you fail, because actually failure is a key lesson. And I think that was a beautiful reminder that, I would really like to highlight, that we all need to learn is failure is not negative. It's looking at failure from what do we learn from it, and what do we do next to move on. So from that, I'd just like to ask you, what's the one piece of advice that you think people should take away from this discussion today?
Yeah, that was almost it, actually. Because we talked about these questions. I was thinking, was that the answer? I might choose that as one, and then come up with another one in that case, because I was that is, I think, useful. one of the most powerful things for me is about being kind to yourself. You can't go far wrong if you start and keep that front and center. Don't judge yourself. And that, as you say, specifically, the only way I think you maybe should judge yourself is if you have those failures and refuse to look at them. I mean, maybe we even have to evolve to do that. But just the sort of warning, I suppose, is failing to recognize failure is failing to learn and failing to grow. So we can deny it. We can be kind to ourselves, but that doesn't mean we don't look at it. We need to sort of look at those experiences in order to learn, in order to grow. So that goes a long way. But I think the other one that I always talk about is I was just trying to think about my stories about whether it's adventure or whether it's there's a couple of lessons there, but I think that the one for me is the short route up the mountain. In this case, that works for everyone. My belief is getting to know yourself better first. So we think it's quickest to go and find the business, as I did, that will replace the income, and thinking, as I did, that I wouldn't mind doing that somewhat. I didn't really spend much time thinking about the businesses. It was more just, is this going to work commercially? Those were good questions, but only when you understood what it is you want, what you like, what attracts you. So I was attracted. So my advice essentially is to figure out what your external goal is, what it is you would like to achieve. But I would caveat that heavily with the first thing to start with is get to know yourself. So in the same way as I discovered, actually, I'm not that it's not complicated. I'm just an adventurer. Use that as your guide. So started you talking about sat navs and route maps and things, but it's like having a sat nav installed. So you know which direction you're going in, and if you've got this adventurer sat nav, then it's automatically going to go and take you the right route that's going to work for you. So for me, it was about what feels adventurous. If this feels adventurous, if it's getting routine, it's not a good sign. If it's too controlled, if it's too ordered, if I'm discovering new things, then I'm going to enjoy the journey, and that's going to help me. So I guess just sort of trying to get to the point, it's just about understand yourself better before you even think about what else it is you want to do, because it's sort of, well, how else could you know what you want to do if you don't know yourself?
Yeah, and that's a great thing to end on, is actually, how do you know what you want to do if you don't know yourself? A good question for us all to reflect on. So thank you very much for sharing your insights and wisdom today, Alex.
You're welcome. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for interviewing me.
You're welcome.